The morning sun cast golden rays through the ornate windows of the Moonstone Palace, illuminating the grandest wedding chamber in the werewolf kingdom. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the vaulted ceiling, their light dancing across walls adorned with ancient tapestries depicting the legendary love stories of Alpha Kings and their chosen mates. Today was supposed to add another chapter to that legacy, the wedding of Alpha King Darius Blackthorn to Lady Seraphina Ravencrest, the most anticipated union in centuries. Seraphina stood before an enormous mirror in her private chambers, her reflection showing a vision of ethereal beauty that had captivated the entire kingdom. Her midnight black hair cascaded in perfect waves down her back, adorned with a crown of silver and moonstone that had belonged to Alpha Queens for generations. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of ivory silk and intricate beadwork, hugged her curves before flowing into a train that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Her violet eyes, a rare trait that marked her as descended from the ancient moon goddess bloodline, sparkled with what everyone assumed was bridal joy. But beneath that perfect exterior, Seraphina's heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and carefully concealed dread. At 23, she had been groomed her entire life for this moment, to become the queen of the most powerful werewolf pack in existence. Her father, Duke Alaric Ravencrest, had orchestrated this marriage when she was merely 16, seeing it as the ultimate political alliance that would secure their family's position for generations. "You look absolutely radiant, my lady," whispered Elena, her loyal lady-in-waiting, as she made final adjustments to the intricate lacework on Seraphina's sleeves. Elena had been with her since childhood, more sister than servant, and was one of the few people who knew the true depths of Seraphina's intelligence and strength. "Thank you, Elena," Seraphina replied softly, her voice carrying none of the excitement one would expect from a bride on her wedding day. "Are the final preparations complete?" "Yes, my lady. The ceremony will begin in exactly 1 hour. Alpha King Darius is already greeting the distinguished guests in the main hall." Eleanor paused, studying her mistress's face in the mirror. "My lady, if I may, you seem troubled. Are you having second thoughts?" Seraphina's laugh was hollow, lacking any real mirth. "Second thoughts? About marrying the most powerful man in our world? About becoming queen of the largest pack territory? What could I possibly have second thoughts about?" The sarcasm in her voice wasn't lost on Eleanor, who had witnessed firsthand the cold, calculating nature of this arranged marriage. Unlike the fairy tales told to young she-wolves, this union had nothing to do with love, mate bonds, or destiny. It was pure politics, a merger of power that would benefit both families while leaving the actual participants as little more than beautiful pawns in a larger game. Alpha King Darius Blackthorn was 31 years old and had ruled the Shadow Moon Pack for 8 years since his father's death. He was undeniably handsome, with dark hair, piercing green eyes, and the kind of commanding presence that made both enemies and allies take notice. His reputation as a fierce warrior and shrewd politician had made him the most eligible bachelor in the werewolf world, with dozens of noble families offering their daughters in marriage. But Seraphina knew the truth that others chose to ignore. Darius was as cold and calculating as he was powerful. In the 2 years since their engagement had been announced, their interactions had been formal, distant, and entirely focused on the political advantages their union would bring. He had never once asked about her thoughts, her dreams, or her feelings about their impending marriage. To him, she was simply the most advantageous choice, beautiful enough to be a worthy queen, intelligent enough to handle royal duties, and connected enough to strengthen his political position. "My lady," Eleanor said carefully, "perhaps after the wedding, things will be different. Perhaps King Darius will..." "Will what?" Seraphina interrupted, turning from the mirror to face her friend. "Will suddenly develop feelings for a woman he's never bothered to truly know. Will discover that political convenience can transform into love." Before Elena could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. "Enter," Seraphina called, assuming it was another servant with last-minute details. Instead, her younger brother Marcus stepped into the room, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by an expression of barely contained anger. At 19, Marcus was everything their father had hoped for in a son: strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of his family. He had never approved of Seraphina's arranged marriage, believing his sister deserved better than a cold political alliance. "Sarah," he said, using the childhood nickname that only family was allowed to use, "I need to speak with you, privately." Elena immediately understood the dismissal and curtsied before leaving the room, closing the door softly behind her. Marcus waited until her footsteps faded before turning to his sister with eyes blazing with fury. "You can't go through with this," he said, without preamble. "I've just learned something that changes everything." Seraphina felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" "I was in the East Wing, checking on some last-minute arrangements for father, when I overheard a conversation between King Darius and his beta, Lucian. They were in the study and the door was slightly ajar." Marcus ran his hands through his dark hair, a gesture Seraphina recognized as a sign of extreme agitation. "Sarah, what I heard, it will destroy you." "Tell me," Seraphina said, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. Marcus looked as though he would rather do anything else in the world, but he met her eyes and spoke the words that would shatter her carefully constructed world. "King Darius was laughing about the marriage. He told Lucian that marrying you was the smartest political move he'd ever made, because you're beautiful enough to be a proper ornament, but boring enough that he won't feel guilty about maintaining his other interests." The words hit Seraphina like physical blows, but Marcus wasn't finished. "He said that he's already made arrangements to continue his relationship with Lady Vivian Ashford after the wedding. Apparently, she's been his mistress for over a year, and he has no intention of giving her up just because he's taking a wife. He actually said—" Marcus's voice broke slightly. "He said that you're so naive and sheltered that you'll probably never even realize what's happening." Seraphina felt the world tilt around her. Lady Vivian Ashford was a stunning redhead from a minor noble family, known for her beauty and her reputation for seducing powerful men. Seraphina had met her several times at court functions and had always found her to be charming, if somewhat calculating. The idea that Vivian had been Darius's mistress all along, that she would continue to be his mistress after their marriage, filled Seraphina with a rage so pure and cold it surprised her with its intensity. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice now barely above a whisper. "He told Lucian that the only reason he chose you over the other candidates was because your father offered the largest dowry and the most favorable trade agreements. He said you're perfectly adequate for producing heirs, but that he'll need real passion from someone who actually interests him." For a long moment, Seraphina stood in complete silence, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. Not just Darius's betrayal, but her father's as well. Duke Alaric had essentially sold her to the highest bidder, packaging her like a prize mare to be bred for political advantage. And Darius had accepted the offer, planning from the beginning to treat her as nothing more than a beautiful, well-connected broodmare, while seeking real companionship elsewhere. "Sarah," Marcus said softly, concerned by her silence. "Say something, please." When Seraphina finally spoke, her voice was calm, controlled, and utterly devoid of emotion. "How long until the ceremony begins?" "About 45 minutes, but Sarah, you can't possibly be thinking of going through with this now that you know—" "Oh, I'm absolutely going through with it," Seraphina said, and Marcus was startled by the smile that spread across her face. It wasn't the gentle, demure smile she usually wore. This smile was sharp, predatory, and filled with a dangerous intelligence that he had rarely seen her display so openly. "I don't understand," Marcus said, confusion replacing his anger. Seraphina turned back to the mirror, but now her reflection showed a different woman entirely. The naive, sheltered noble daughter was gone, replaced by someone with steel in her spine and fire in her violet eyes. "Marcus, Do you remember the stories grandmother used to tell us about our ancestor, Queen Lyrelai the Vengeful, the one who destroyed 3 kingdoms when they betrayed her? But Sarah, those were just stories. Were they? Seraphina interrupted, her smile growing wider. Grandmother always said that the women of our bloodline had power that went far beyond what others could see. She said we were descended from the moon goddess herself, and that when we were truly wronged, we could call upon that divine heritage for justice. Marcus stared at his sister as if seeing her for the first time. What are you planning? I'm going to give King Darius exactly what he wants, Seraphina said, her voice now carrying an undertone that made Marcus's wolf instincts prick with unease. He wants a beautiful, naive wife who will produce heirs and never question his other activities. He wants someone perfectly adequate who will serve as a royal ornament while he finds real passion elsewhere. She turned from the mirror, and Marcus took an involuntary step backward at the expression on her face. He's going to get exactly that, but he's also going to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones you underestimate. He thinks I'm boring and naive? Perfect. Let him continue thinking that right up until the moment I destroy everything he holds dear. Sarah, you're scaring me, Marcus admitted. What exactly are you planning to do? Seraphina's laugh was soft and musical, but it carried an edge that made Marcus's blood run cold. I'm going to be the perfect wife, Marcus. Absolutely perfect. So perfect that when I'm finished with him, King Darius will wish he had never heard the name Ravencrest. She moved to her jewelry box and withdrew a necklace that Marcus had never seen before, a delicate silver chain holding a pendant that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As she fastened it around her neck, the pendant settled just above her heart, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn he saw it pulse with its own inner darkness. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was grandmother's," Seraphina replied, her fingers tracing the pendant's surface. "She gave it to me before she died and told me to wear it only when I needed to remember who I really am. I think today qualifies." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Elena's voice called softly, "My lady, it's time." Seraphina took one last look in the mirror, and Marcus saw her transform yet again. The dangerous, calculating woman disappeared, replaced by the perfect image of a blushing bride. Her smile became soft and demure, her posture shifted to convey gentle femininity, and her eyes took on the dreamy expression of a woman in love. "How do I look, brother?" she asked, and her voice was once again that of the sweet, sheltered, noble daughter everyone expected. Marcus stared at her in amazement. The transformation was so complete, so perfect, that he almost doubted what he had just witnessed. "You look exactly like what everyone expects to see." "Perfect," Seraphina said, moving toward the door, "because the last thing I want is for anyone to suspect what's really happening here." As they walked toward the ceremony, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed the birth of something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. His sister was about to become queen, but not in the way anyone expected. The game was about to begin, and Seraphina Ravencrest was playing by rules that no one else even knew existed. The great cathedral of the Moonstone Palace had been transformed into a vision of ethereal beauty that would be remembered for generations. Thousands of white roses intertwined with silver ribbons created archways that seemed to glow in the filtered sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. The ancient stone walls, which had witnessed countless royal ceremonies over the centuries, now bore witness to what the kingdom believed would be the most romantic wedding in their history. 700 of the most powerful werewolves in existence filled the cathedral's ornate pews, alpha leaders from every major pack, nobles whose bloodlines stretched back to the founding of the kingdom, and dignitaries from allied supernatural communities had all gathered to witness the union that would shape the political landscape for decades to come. The air hummed with barely contained power as so many dominant wolves gathered in one space, their formal attire doing little to mask the predatory grace that marked them as apex predators. At the altar, Alpha King Darius Blackthorn stood in his ceremonial regalia, a figure of imposing masculine beauty that had half the unmated females in the kingdom sighing with envy for his bride. His midnight black ceremonial robes, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light with every movement, emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height. The crown of shadows, an ancient artifact of black metal and dark gemstones, rested on his dark hair like it had been crafted specifically for him. His green eyes surveyed the assembled crowd with the confident satisfaction of a man who had achieved everything he had ever wanted. Beside him stood his beta, Lucian Ashford, whose presence served as a cruel irony that only Seraphina and Marcus truly understood. Lucian was Lady Vivian's older brother, and his position as the king's most trusted advisor had undoubtedly facilitated his sister's access to the royal chambers. His handsome features showed nothing but appropriate solemnity for the occasion, but Seraphina wondered if he was thinking about the conversation Marcus had overheard, or if such casual cruelty was so commonplace that it had already been forgotten. The cathedral's massive doors opened with a resonance that seemed to echo through every soul present, and the assembled crowd rose as one. The royal orchestra began the traditional wedding march, a haunting melody that spoke of eternal bonds and destined love. Duke Alaric Ravencrest appeared first, his silver hair and formal dress uniform marking him as a man of considerable power and influence. His face showed the appropriate pride of a father giving away his daughter to the most powerful man in their world, but Seraphina now recognized the calculating satisfaction in his eyes for what it truly was. Then Seraphina appeared, and a collective intake of breath swept through the cathedral. She moved with the grace of a woman born to royalty, her wedding dress seeming to float around her as she glided down the aisle. The crown of silver and moonstone caught the light and cast prismatic reflections that danced across the walls like captured starlight. Her violet eyes were appropriately downcast in a display of maidenly modesty, and a soft smile played at her lips as if she were lost in dreams of her coming happiness. But beneath that perfect exterior, Seraphina's mind was working with the precision of a master strategist. As she walked toward her future husband, she catalogued every face in the crowd, noting who was present and who was conspicuously absent. She observed the way certain nobles watched her with calculating eyes, already planning how to curry favor with the new queen. She saw the mixture of envy and admiration on the faces of the unmarried women, and the speculative looks of the men who were undoubtedly wondering if the new queen might be amenable to the same kind of arrangements that her husband apparently favored. Most importantly, she spotted Lady Vivian Ashford seated in the third row, looking absolutely stunning in a deep emerald gown that complemented her auburn hair and green eyes. Vivian's expression was perfectly composed, showing nothing but appropriate happiness for the royal couple, but Seraphina caught the subtle way her eyes lingered on Darius with possessive familiarity. The knowledge that this woman had been sharing her future husband's bed while Seraphina planned their wedding filled her with a cold rage that she carefully buried beneath her bridal smile. When Seraphina reached the altar, Darius stepped forward to take her hand, and she allowed herself to meet his eyes for the first time that day. What she saw there confirmed everything Marcus had told her. There was no warmth, no genuine affection, not even basic respect. Darius looked at her the way a man might look at a particularly fine piece of art he had acquired, with satisfaction at owning something beautiful and valuable, but no real emotional connection to the object itself. "You look radiant, my dear," Darius murmured as he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that drew sighs of romantic appreciation from the watching crowd. But Seraphina heard the perfunctory nature of the compliment, the way he delivered it like a line he had rehearsed. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she replied softly, her voice carrying just the right note of breathless adoration that everyone expected to hear. "I'm so happy." The ceremony proceeded with all the ancient ritual and pageantry that tradition demanded. High Priest Matthias, an elderly wolf whose family had served the royal line for centuries, spoke the words that had bound Alpha Kings to their queens for over 1,000 years. He called upon the moon goddess to bless their union, to grant them strength in leadership and fertility in their bloodline. The irony of asking for divine blessing on a marriage built entirely on deception and political convenience was not lost on Seraphina. When the time came for vows, Darius spoke first, his deep voice carrying clearly through the cathedral as he promised to love, honor, and protect his bride for all the days of his life. The words were beautiful, traditional, and utterly meaningless. Seraphina watched his face as he spoke and saw no flicker of genuine emotion, no hint that he meant a single word he was saying. He was performing, playing the role of devoted groom for the benefit of their audience. Then it was Seraphina's turn, and she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her as she prepared to speak the words that would seal her fate. But instead of the traditional vows, she had prepared something special, words that would seem romantic and devoted to their audience, but would carry a very different meaning for those who truly understood what was happening. "My beloved Darius," she began, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. "Today I pledge to you not just my love, but my complete devotion. I promise to be the wife you deserve, to give you exactly what you have earned through your actions and choices." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd at what they interpreted as a particularly romantic declaration. Darius smiled, clearly pleased by what he saw as appropriate submissiveness from his new bride. "I vow to stand beside you as your queen," Seraphina continued, "and to ensure that our marriage brings you everything you truly desire. I promise that you will receive the full consequences of every decision you make, and that our union will be exactly what you have made it." Again, the crowd sighed with romantic appreciation, hearing only a bride's promise to be supportive and loving. But Marcus, watching from the front row, caught the subtle emphasis on certain words and felt a chill run down his spine. His sister wasn't making wedding vows. She was issuing a declaration of war disguised as romantic poetry. "I pledge to you my intelligence, my strength, and my absolute commitment to ensuring that you get precisely what you deserve from this marriage," Seraphina concluded, her violet eyes meeting Darius's green ones with an intensity that he interpreted as adoration, but which was actually something far more dangerous. When High Priest Matthias called for the rings, Seraphina extended her hand and felt the weight of the royal wedding band as Darius slipped it onto her finger. The ring was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, featuring a massive moonstone surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to Alpha Queens for centuries. As the cool metal settled against her skin, Seraphina felt something shift inside her, as if the ring were not just a symbol of marriage, but a conduit for power that had been waiting for her to claim it. "By the power vested in me by the moon goddess and the ancient laws of our people," High Priest Matthias declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, Alpha King and Queen of the Shadow Moon Pack. You may kiss your bride, your majesty." Darius leaned forward to claim the kiss that would seal their union, and Seraphina allowed him to pull her into his arms. To the watching crowd, it was a moment of perfect romantic triumph, the powerful king claiming his beautiful queen in a kiss that spoke of passion and devotion. But Seraphina felt nothing but cold calculation as Darius's lips touched hers. There was no spark, no connection, no hint of the mate bond that werewolf folklore claimed would unite true partners. When they broke apart, the cathedral erupted in cheers and applause. Rose petals fell like snow from the balconies as the newly married couple turned to face their subjects. Darius raised their joined hands in a gesture of triumph, and Seraphina smiled with radiant joy that was so perfectly performed that even she almost believed it. As they walked back down the aisle together, Seraphina caught Vivian's eye and saw something that made her inner wolf snarl with satisfaction. For just a moment, Vivienne's perfect composure slipped, and Seraphina saw raw jealousy and possessive anger flash across her features. The other woman quickly recovered, but it was too late. Seraphina had seen the truth of her feelings for Darius, and that knowledge would prove useful in the games to come. The reception that followed was a glittering affair held in the palace's grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors that had been polished to mirror brightness. The kingdom's most powerful figures mingled over champagne and delicacies, while a full orchestra provided music for dancing. Seraphina played her role perfectly, accepting congratulations with gracious humility and speaking to each guest as if their presence was the greatest gift she could have received. But all the while, she was gathering information. She noted which nobles seemed genuinely pleased by the marriage and which appeared to be merely going through the motions. She observed the subtle power dynamics at play, the way certain individuals deferred to others, the alliances and rivalries that would shape her future as queen. Most importantly, she watched Darius, studying his interactions with different people and beginning to map the network of relationships and obligations that defined his power. When the time came for the traditional first dance, Darius led her onto the floor with the confident grace of a man who had never doubted his right to possess whatever he desired. As they moved together to the romantic melody, he leaned close to whisper in her ear, "You've been perfect today, Seraphina. Absolutely perfect. I think this marriage is going to work out very well indeed." Seraphina smiled up at him with adoring eyes that masked the predatory satisfaction in her heart. "I'm so glad you think so, my husband. I have such wonderful plans for our future together." As they danced, surrounded by the cream of werewolf society and bathed in golden light, no one could have guessed that they were witnessing not the beginning of a fairy tale romance, but the opening moves in a game of revenge that would reshape the very foundations of the kingdom. The wedding was over, but the real battle was just beginning. The honeymoon suite in the palace's east wing had been prepared with meticulous attention to romantic detail. Rose petals scattered across silk sheets, candles casting flickering shadows on tapestried walls, and champagne chilling in a silver bucket. Everything designed to create the perfect atmosphere for a new royal couple's first night together. But as Seraphina stood before the ornate mirror in the adjoining dressing room, removing the crown and jewelry that had marked her transformation from noble lady to queen, she felt nothing but cold calculation where anticipation should have been. Darius had excused himself to attend to some urgent business that couldn't wait until after their wedding night, leaving Seraphina alone with her thoughts and her plans. She knew exactly what that urgent business entailed, a final rendezvous with Lady Vivienne before he had to play the role of devoted husband. The knowledge that he was with his mistress on their wedding night should have devastated her, but instead, it filled her with grim satisfaction. Every insult, every betrayal, every moment of casual cruelty was another piece of ammunition she could use against him when the time came. Elena helped her out of the elaborate wedding gown, replacing it with a nightgown of ivory silk that was both beautiful and modest, exactly what everyone would expect from a sheltered noble bride. As her lady-in-waiting prepared to leave for the night, Seraphina caught her hand. "Elena," she said softly, "I need you to do something for me, something that must remain absolutely secret." Elena's eyes widened with concern. "Of course, my lady. Anything. I need you to begin keeping detailed records of everything that happens in this palace. Every conversation you overhear, every piece of gossip from the other servants, every visitor who comes and goes. Write it all down and bring the reports to me personally." "My lady, I don't understand. Why would you need—" "Because knowledge is power," Seraphina interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that Elena had never heard before. "And I intend to know everything about everyone in this palace. Can you do this for me?" Elena nodded slowly, though confusion was clear in her expression. "Yes, my lady. But may I ask, are you in some kind of danger?" Seraphina's smile was sharp and cold. "No, Elena, I'm not in danger. But there are others who soon will be. After Elena left, Seraphina moved to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. The moon was full, casting silver light across the manicured lawns and flower beds that had been designed to showcase the royal family's wealth and power. Somewhere in those gardens, or perhaps in one of the private chambers that Darius thought she knew nothing about, her new husband was with another woman on what should have been the most important night of their marriage. The pendant that had belonged to her grandmother seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin, and Seraphina found herself thinking about the stories the old woman had told her about their bloodline. The Ravencrest family claimed descent from the moon goddess herself, and while most people dismissed such claims as noble fantasy, Seraphina was beginning to wonder if there might be more truth to the legends than anyone realized. When Darius finally returned to their chambers nearly 3 hours later, Seraphina was waiting for him with perfect patience, seated in an elegant chair by the fireplace with a book of poetry in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her expression showing nothing but loving concern for his lateness. "I was beginning to worry," she said softly, rising to greet him. "I hope everything was resolved satisfactorily." Darius had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, though whether from guilt or mere annoyance at having to maintain the pretense, Seraphina couldn't tell. "Yes, just some tedious administrative matters that couldn't wait. I apologize for keeping you waiting on our wedding night." "Of course," Seraphina replied, moving closer to him. "Your duties as king must always come first. I understand that completely." The relief in Darius's eyes at her easy acceptance was almost insulting. He had expected her to be upset, to demand explanations or attention, and her calm understanding clearly reinforced his belief that he had chosen a perfectly manageable wife. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms with the confident assumption that she would be grateful for whatever attention he chose to give her. "You're everything I hoped for in a queen," he murmured against her hair. "Beautiful, understanding, and intelligent enough to know your place." Seraphina allowed him to hold her, even leaned into his embrace, as if his words were romantic rather than condescending. "I live to serve you, my husband, in all things." What followed was a wedding night that perfectly matched the political nature of their marriage. Efficient, passionless, and entirely focused on the biological necessity of producing heirs. Darius performed his husbandly duties with the same detached competence he brought to state business, while Seraphina played the role of the innocent bride, learning about passion from her experienced husband. Neither of them felt any genuine connection or pleasure, but both were satisfied that they had fulfilled their obligations. Afterward, as Darius slept beside her, Seraphina stared at the ceiling and began planning in earnest. She had 3 main objectives. First, to establish herself as the perfect queen in the eyes of the court and the people. Second, to gather enough information about Darius's activities and allies to destroy him completely when the time came. And third, to build her own network of loyal supporters who would stand with her when she made her move. The first objective would be the easiest. Seraphina had been trained from childhood to be the ideal noble wife, and those skills would serve her well as queen. She would be gracious, charitable, intelligent, but not threatening, beautiful, but not vain. She would win the love of the people and the respect of the nobility through perfect performance of her royal duties. The second objective would require more subtlety. She needed to learn about Darius's relationship with Vivian, his other political alliances, his financial dealings, and any secrets that could be used against him. This would mean cultivating relationships with servants, nobles, and anyone else who might have access to useful information. The third objective would be the most dangerous. Building a network of supporters meant identifying people who were dissatisfied with Darius's rule, who had been wronged by him in some way, or who could be convinced that their interests would be better served by supporting her. This would require exceptional care, as one wrong move could expose her plans and destroy everything. Over the following weeks, Seraphina threw herself into her new role with an enthusiasm that impressed everyone who met her. She established a daily routine of charitable visits to orphanages and hospitals, endearing herself to the common people who had rarely seen royalty take such personal interest in their welfare. She hosted elegant salons for the noble ladies of the court, creating an atmosphere where gossip flowed as freely as wine and where she could gather intelligence while appearing to do nothing more than socialize. Most importantly, she began to study the palace's power structures with the intensity of a military strategist. She learned which servants were loyal to Darius personally and which were simply doing their jobs. She identified which nobles had genuine influence and which were merely decorative. She observed the subtle ways that information and favors flowed through the court, mapping the invisible networks that really controlled the kingdom. Her relationship with Darius settled into a pattern that suited both of them perfectly, though for very different reasons. He appreciated having a wife who made no emotional demands on him, who performed her public duties flawlessly, and who never questioned his absences or activities. She appreciated having a husband who underestimated her so completely that he never bothered to monitor her activities or question her motives. 3 months after their wedding, Seraphina made her first significant move. She had learned that Lord Chancellor Aldrich Thornfield, one of Darius's most trusted advisors, had been embezzling from the royal treasury for years. The amounts were small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to have funded a very comfortable lifestyle for his family. More importantly, she had discovered that Darius knew about the embezzlement, but was allowing it to continue because Thornfield's gratitude made him a more malleable ally. Instead of exposing Thornfield directly, Seraphina arranged for the evidence to be discovered by the royal auditor during a routine review. When the scandal broke, she was perfectly positioned to console her husband over the betrayal of a trusted friend, while privately noting which other nobles seemed unsurprised by the revelation. Thornfield's disgrace created a vacancy in the inner circle that would need to be filled, and Seraphina was already considering candidates who might be more amenable to her influence. The incident also served another purpose. It demonstrated to the court that even the king's closest allies were not immune to consequences for their actions. The message was subtle but clear. Loyalty to the crown was expected, but loyalty alone would not protect those who abused their positions. As autumn arrived, Seraphina received news that filled her with savage satisfaction. Lady Vivian Ashford was pregnant. The information came through Eleanor, who had proven remarkably adept at gathering intelligence from the palace's extensive servant network. According to the whispers below stairs, Vivian had been trying to keep the pregnancy secret, but morning sickness and a changing figure had made concealment impossible. "What will you do, my lady?" Elena asked as she delivered this news during one of their private meetings. Seraphina smiled, and Elena was struck once again by how much her mistress had changed since the wedding. The gentle, sheltered noble daughter was gone, replaced by someone with steel in her spine and ice in her veins. "Nothing," Seraphina replied. "At least, nothing direct. But I think it's time for me to become more involved in the social welfare of unmarried mothers in the kingdom. Perhaps I should establish a charitable foundation to help women who find themselves in difficult circumstances." Eleanor's eyes widened as she understood the implications. "My lady, that's brilliant. You'll be seen as compassionate and charitable, while also ensuring that everyone in the kingdom knows exactly what kind of man their king really is," Seraphina finished. "Of course, I would never say anything directly. I'm far too well-bred for such gossip. But if people happen to draw their own conclusions about why the new queen is suddenly so concerned with the plight of women who bear children outside of marriage." The foundation was announced a week later, with great fanfare and widespread approval from both the nobility and the common people. Queen Seraphina's Foundation for Maternal Welfare would provide support, medical care, and financial assistance to any woman in the kingdom who needed help during pregnancy or childbirth, regardless of her marital status. The timing was perfect. Within days of the announcement, rumors began circulating about Lady Vivienne's condition. No one could prove anything, and Seraphina never said a word against the other woman, but the coincidence was too obvious to ignore. The Queen's sudden interest in helping unwed mothers, combined with whispers about a certain red-haired lady's mysterious illness, created exactly the kind of speculation that Seraphina had hoped for. Darius was furious when he realized what was happening, but there was nothing he could do without confirming the very rumors he wanted to suppress. He couldn't criticize his wife's charitable work without seeming callous, and he couldn't defend Vivienne without admitting their relationship. For the first time since their wedding, Seraphina saw genuine emotion in her husband's eyes when he looked at her, and that emotion was fear. The game had begun in earnest, and the Queen was winning. Winter descended upon the Moonstone Palace with unusual severity, blanketing the kingdom in snow that seemed to mirror the growing chill in the relationship between the royal couple. To outside observers, King Darius and Queen Seraphina maintained the perfect facade of a harmonious marriage, but behind closed doors, a war of subtle moves and calculated strikes was being waged with increasing intensity. Seraphina's charitable foundation had become the talk of the kingdom, praised by nobles and commoners alike for its compassionate approach to a problem that had long been ignored by the aristocracy. The Queen herself had become a beloved figure, known for her personal visits to the Foundation's facilities and her genuine concern for the women under her care. What the public didn't know was that each visit served a dual purpose. While Seraphina genuinely cared about helping these women, she was also building a network of loyal supporters who owed their welfare to her personal intervention. Lady Vivienne Ashford had quietly withdrawn from court life, claiming a need to care for her ailing mother in the countryside. The official story was accepted without question, but the timing of her departure, combined with the Queen's new charitable focus, had created exactly the kind of whispered speculation that Seraphina had intended. Darius's reputation, while not openly challenged, had acquired a subtle tarnish that grew stronger with each passing week. But Seraphina's most significant victory had come from an unexpected source. Lord Marcus Ravencrest, her younger brother, had been appointed to fill the vacancy left by the disgraced Lord Chancellor Thornfield. The appointment had been Darius's idea, suggested by advisors who saw it as a way to strengthen ties with the powerful Ravencrest family. What they didn't realize was that Marcus's loyalty lay entirely with his sister, and his new position gave Seraphina direct access to the kingdom's most sensitive political and financial information. The treasury records make for fascinating reading, Marcus reported during one of their carefully orchestrated private meetings in the Queen's solar. To any observer, they appeared to be nothing more than loving siblings sharing family gossip over afternoon tea. Our dear king has been far more generous with certain noble families than the official budgets would suggest. Seraphina set down her teacup with deliberate precision. How generous? Lord Ashford's family has received substantial grants for agricultural improvements that seem to have resulted in remarkably little actual improvement to their lands. Lady Cordelia Blackwood has been awarded exclusive trading contracts that have made her family wealthy beyond their previous station. And Duke Reginald Voss has somehow managed to avoid paying taxes on his most profitable holdings for the past 3 years. All of them members of Darius's inner circle, Seraphina observed, and all of them now dependent on his continued favor for their prosperity. Exactly, but there's more. I've found evidence of payments to several individuals whose names don't appear on any official roster. The amounts suggest they're being compensated for services, but there's no record of what those services might be. Seraphina's eyes sharpened with interest. Spies? That would be my guess. Or perhaps enforcers of some kind. People who handle the sort of business that a king can't be officially connected to. This information was more valuable than gold. If Darius was maintaining a network of unofficial agents, it meant he was involved in activities that went far beyond the normal scope of royal authority. It also meant that there were people out there who knew his secrets, people who could potentially be turned against him if the right pressure were applied. "I need names," Seraphina said, "and I need to know everything about these people, their families, their debts, their weaknesses." "Already working on it," Marcus replied with a grin that reminded Seraphina of their childhood adventures. "It's amazing how much information you can gather when people assume you're just a harmless younger son playing at politics." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Elena entered with the practiced discretion that had made her invaluable to Seraphina's plans. "Your Majesty," she said with a perfect curtsy, "His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room. There are visitors from the Northern Territories who wish to pay their respects to the Queen." Seraphina rose gracefully, smoothing her elegant winter gown of deep blue velvet. "Of course, Marcus. We'll continue our discussion about the family estates later. Naturally, sister, give my regards to our esteemed king." The throne room was a magnificent space designed to intimidate and impress visitors with the power and wealth of the Shadow Moon Pack. Massive columns supported a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of legendary Alpha Kings, while the throne itself was carved from a single piece of black marble and inlaid with precious metals and gems. Darius sat upon it with the casual confidence of a man born to rule, but Seraphina noticed the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he was not entirely comfortable with whatever was about to unfold. The visitors from the Northern Territories were a delegation of 3 alphas, representing some of the most remote and traditional packs in the kingdom. These were wolves who valued strength above all else and who had little patience for the political maneuvering that characterized court life. Their leader, Alpha Fenris Ironwood, was a massive man with silver hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. His reputation for honesty and directness made him both respected and feared throughout the kingdom. "Your Majesties," Alpha Fenris said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We come bearing news from the northern borders that requires immediate attention." Darius leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued. "What news?" "Rogue wolves have been attacking our settlements with increasing frequency. These are not random acts of violence. They're organized, coordinated, and they seem to know exactly when and where to strike for maximum damage." Seraphina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Rogue wolves, werewolves who had been cast out from their packs or who had chosen to live outside pack structure, were always dangerous, but organized rogue attacks were virtually unheard of. Such coordination required leadership, resources, and most importantly, inside information about pack defenses and patrol schedules. "How many attacks?" Darius asked, his voice carefully controlled. 17 in the past 2 months, replied Alpha Fenris. 12 settlements damaged, 43 dead, and twice that number injured. We've managed to capture a few of the rogues, but they die before we can extract any useful information. "Ah, die? How?" Seraphina asked, speaking for the first time since the delegation's arrival. Alpha Fenris turned to her with an expression of grim respect. "Poison, Your Majesty, hidden in false teeth that they bite down on when captured. Someone has trained these rogues very well indeed." The implications were staggering. Rogue wolves were typically desperate, disorganized creatures driven by hunger and madness. The idea that someone had managed to organize them into an effective fighting force, complete with suicide protocols to prevent interrogation, suggested a level of planning and resources that could only come from within the established pack hierarchy. "Do you have any theories about who might be behind these attacks?" Darius asked, though Seraphina noticed that he avoided meeting the Alpha's eyes directly. "We have suspicions," Alpha Fenris replied carefully. "But we came here hoping that Your Majesty might have insights that we lack. After all, organizing such attacks would require significant resources and inside knowledge of our defenses." the kind of resources and knowledge that would only be available to someone with considerable power and influence. The accusation was subtle but unmistakable. Alpha Fenris was suggesting that someone within the royal court, possibly someone very close to the throne, was behind the rogue attacks. Seraphina watched her husband's face carefully and saw the flash of something that might have been guilt or fear before his expression returned to its usual mask of royal composure. "I assure you, Alpha Fenris, that we will investigate this matter thoroughly," Darius said. "In the meantime, I'll dispatch additional royal guards to assist with border security." "With respect, Your Majesty," Alpha Fenris replied, "we don't need more guards. We need to find whoever is funding and organizing these attacks and put an end to them permanently." After the delegation departed, Seraphina found herself alone with Darius for the first time in weeks. The tension in the throne room was palpable as they faced each other across the space that separated their thrones. "Troubling news," Seraphina said carefully. "Yes," Darius replied, but she noticed that he seemed more agitated than the situation warranted. "Rogue attacks are always a concern, but this level of organization is unusual. Indeed, one might almost think that someone with access to pack intelligence was providing information to these rogues." Darius's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she saw raw suspicion in his gaze. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing at all," Seraphina replied with perfect innocence. "I'm simply observing that such coordination would require inside knowledge. I'm sure your investigation will reveal the truth." That evening, Seraphina met with Marcus in the secret passage that connected their chambers, a remnant of the palace's original construction that few people knew existed. The conversation with Alpha Fenris had confirmed her growing suspicions about her husband's activities, and she needed to share this information with her most trusted ally. "He's involved," she said without preamble. "Darius is behind the rogue attacks." Marcus's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Not certain enough to prove it in court, but certain enough to know that we're on the right track." His reaction to Alpha Fenris's questions was telling. But why would he order attacks on his own territory? It makes no sense. Seraphina had been thinking about this question since the delegation's departure, and she believed she had found the answer. Because he needs a crisis. Think about it. What's the traditional response to external threats? "Consolidation of power," Marcus said slowly. "Emergency measures that give the king additional authority." Exactly. And what better way to distract from rumors about his personal life than to position himself as the strong leader protecting the kingdom from dangerous enemies? "You think he's planning to use the rogue attacks as justification for expanding his power?" "I think he's already doing it. Those mysterious payments you found in the treasury records, I'd wager they're going to whoever is organizing the rogue attacks. Darius creates the crisis, then presents himself as the solution." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "If you're right, then he's not just an unfaithful husband. He's a traitor to his own people." "Yes," Seraphina agreed, "and that gives us exactly what we need to destroy him completely." But even as she spoke the words, Seraphina felt a chill of apprehension. If Darius was willing to orchestrate attacks on his own people for political gain, then he was far more dangerous than she had initially realized. The game they were playing had stakes higher than personal revenge. The safety and stability of the entire kingdom hung in the balance. The web was tightening around Darius, but Seraphina was beginning to realize that she might have caught something far more deadly than she had bargained for. The spring equinox brought with it a celebration that would be remembered in the annals of werewolf history, though not for the reasons anyone expected. The Festival of the Moon's Renewal was the kingdom's most important annual celebration, marking the time when the moon goddess was said to bless the land with new life and renewed power. For Queen Seraphina, it would mark something else entirely, the culmination of months of careful planning and the moment when she would finally claim her revenge against the husband who had betrayed her so completely. The great hall of the Moonstone Palace had been transformed into a vision of ethereal beauty for the occasion. Thousands of white flowers created cascading arrangements that seemed to glow in the candlelight, while silver ribbons and crystal ornaments caught and reflected the light from dozens of chandeliers. The kingdom's most powerful nobles had gathered for 3 days of festivities that would conclude with the traditional renewal ceremony, where the Alpha King and Queen would renew their vows before the Moon Goddess and receive her blessing for the coming year. Seraphina stood before her mirror in the royal chambers, allowing Elena to make final adjustments to her ceremonial gown. The dress was a masterpiece of silver silk and moonstone embroidery that seemed to capture and hold starlight within its threads. The crown of queens, an ancient artifact that had adorned the heads of alpha queens for over a millennium, rested upon her dark hair like a constellation of captured stars. But it was the pendant at her throat, her grandmother's mysterious gift, that drew the eye and seemed to pulse with its own inner darkness. "You look magnificent, Your Majesty," Elena whispered, her voice filled with genuine awe, like the moon goddess herself. "Thank you, Elena," Seraphina replied, her voice calm despite the anticipation coursing through her veins. "Are all the preparations complete?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Marcus has confirmed that everything is in place. The evidence has been distributed to the appropriate parties, and your allies are ready to act on your signal." Seraphina nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settling upon her shoulders. Tonight, she would either triumph completely or lose everything in the attempt. There would be no middle ground, no opportunity for retreat. She had spent months gathering evidence, building alliances, and positioning herself for this moment. Now it was time to see if her careful planning would be enough to bring down the most powerful man in the kingdom. The evening began with the traditional feast, where hundreds of nobles gathered in the great hall to celebrate the renewal of life and power. Seraphina played her role perfectly, moving through the crowd with grace and warmth, accepting congratulations on the approaching anniversary of her wedding, and speaking with genuine affection about her charitable work. To every observer, she appeared to be exactly what she had always seemed, a beautiful, devoted queen who had found perfect happiness in her marriage to the powerful Alpha King. Darius, resplendent in his ceremonial robes of midnight blue and silver, seemed equally content as he moved through the crowd of well-wishers. He spoke with confidence about the kingdom's prosperity, the successful resolution of the rogue wolf crisis, and his satisfaction with his marriage to such a perfect queen. What he didn't know was that several of the nobles he spoke with had spent the afternoon reviewing documents that would destroy his reputation forever. The evidence that Marcus had so carefully gathered over the months had been compiled into a comprehensive dossier that painted a picture of corruption, betrayal, and treason that was impossible to ignore. Financial records showing payments to the rogue wolf organizers, correspondence detailing the planned attacks, and testimony from captured rogues who had finally been convinced to speak. All of it pointed to a conspiracy that reached the very heart of the royal court. But Seraphina had been even more thorough than that. She had also gathered evidence of Darius's affair with Lady Vivian, including love letters that detailed not only their physical relationship, but also his contempt for his wife and his plans to continue the affair indefinitely. Most damaging of all, she had obtained a recording crystal, a rare magical artifact that could preserve conversations, containing Darius's own words as he boasted to Lucian about his clever manipulation of his naive bride. As the feast concluded and the guests moved to the ceremonial chamber for the renewal ceremony, Seraphina felt a calm settle over her that she recognized as the same feeling she had experienced on her wedding day. She was no longer the sheltered, noble daughter who had walked down the aisle 9 months ago. She was a queen in her own right, a woman who had learned to wield power with precision and ruthlessness that would have impressed her legendary ancestors. The ceremonial chamber was the most sacred space in the palace, its walls carved with ancient symbols that were said to channel the moon goddess's power directly to the earth. At the center of the room stood an altar of white marble that had been blessed by high priests for over 1,000 years. Tonight, it would witness not a renewal of sacred vows, but the destruction of a marriage built on lies and betrayal. High Priest Matthias began the ceremony with the traditional invocation to the moon goddess, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber as hundreds of the kingdom's most powerful wolves watched in reverent silence. The ceremony was designed to be a moment of spiritual renewal where the Alpha King and Queen would recommit themselves to each other and to their sacred duty to protect and guide their people. "Great Moon Goddess," the High Priest intoned, "we gather before you on this sacred night to witness the renewal of the bond between your chosen servants. Look down upon King Darius and Queen Seraphina with favor and bless their union with your divine light." As the ritual words washed over the assembled crowd, Seraphina felt the pendant at her throat grow warm against her skin. She had never truly believed in the old stories about her family's connection to the moon goddess, but tonight, something felt different. There was power in the air, ancient and patient, as if the very stones of the palace were holding their breath in anticipation. Darius stepped forward first, as tradition demanded, to speak his renewal vows before the assembled court. He looked magnificent in the candlelight, every inch the powerful Alpha King that the kingdom needed and deserved. His voice rang with confidence as he spoke the ancient words. "Before the moon goddess and these witnesses, I, Darius Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Shadow Moon Pack, do solemnly renew my vows to my queen and my people. I pledge to rule with wisdom, to protect with strength, and to honor the sacred bonds that unite us all." The crowd murmured approval, but Seraphina noticed that several key nobles remained silent. Alpha Fenris Ironwood stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face showing nothing but grim attention. Duke Aldwin Stormheart, whose daughter had been passed over for queen in favor of Seraphina, watched with calculating eyes. Lord Commander Thaddeus Greystone, leader of the Royal Guard, kept his hand resting on his sword hilt in a gesture that could have been ceremonial or threatening. Now it was Seraphina's turn. She stepped forward to the altar, her silver gown seeming to capture and amplify the moonlight streaming through the chamber's crystal windows. Every eye in the room was upon her as she prepared to speak the words that would either renew her marriage or destroy it forever. "Before the moon goddess and these witnesses," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I, Seraphina Ravencrest Blackthorn, Queen of the Shadow Moon Pack, do solemnly speak the truth that has been hidden in darkness." Ah! A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. These were not the traditional renewal vows, and several people began to shift uncomfortably as they realized something was wrong. "I pledge to expose the lies that have poisoned our kingdom," Seraphina continued, her violet eyes fixed on Darius's face as she watched understanding and fear dawn in his expression. "I pledge to reveal the betrayals that have been committed against our people, and I pledge to ensure that justice is served, no matter how powerful the guilty may believe themselves to be." Darius stepped toward her, his face a mask of confusion and growing anger. "Seraphina, what are you doing? These are not the proper words." "No," she interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "The proper words would be lies, just as our entire marriage has been built on lies. But tonight, before the moon goddess and our people, I choose truth." She turned to address the assembled crowd, her voice rising with power and authority that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her own strength. "Noble lords and ladies of the court, I stand before you tonight, not as the naive bride you have known, but as a queen who has discovered the truth about the man you have followed. The man who stands beside me is not the honorable leader you believe him to be. He is a traitor, a murderer, and a deceiver who has betrayed every vow he has ever made." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs and angry voices, but Seraphina raised her hand for silence, and to her amazement, the crowd obeyed. The pendant at her throat was now burning against her skin, and she could feel power flowing through her that she had never experienced before. "I have evidence," she declared, and Marcus stepped forward from the crowd, carrying a leather satchel that contained months of careful investigation. Evidence that King Darius has been funding and organizing the rogue wolf attacks that have terrorized our northern territories. Evidence that he has murdered his own people for political gain. Evidence that he has stolen from the royal treasury to pay for his crimes. Darius's face had gone white with rage and fear. "This is treason," he snarled, his alpha power radiating outward in waves that should have forced every wolf in the chamber to submit. "I am your king! How dare you?" But his power seemed to break against Seraphina like waves against a cliff. She stood unmoved, her own presence growing stronger with each passing moment. "You are no king of mine," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. "A true king protects his people. A true king honors his vows. A true king does not murder children in their beds to create the crisis he needs to consolidate power." Marcus began distributing copies of the evidence to the assembled nobles, and Seraphina watched as faces changed from confusion to shock to outrage as they read the damning documents, the financial records, the correspondence, the testimony of captured rogues. All of it painted a picture of systematic betrayal that was impossible to deny. "And lest anyone think this is merely a political dispute," Seraphina continued, "let them also know that this man has dishonored our marriage from the very beginning. Even now his mistress carries his child while he stands before you pretending to be a faithful husband." She activated the recording crystal with a gesture, and Darius's own voice filled the chamber, speaking the words that Marcus had overheard months ago. The casual cruelty, the contempt for his wife, the boasting about his clever manipulation, all of it was laid bare before the assembled court. The effect was immediate and devastating. Nobles who had supported Darius for years turned away in disgust. Alpha Fenris stepped forward, his massive frame radiating barely controlled fury. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice like thunder. "Did you order the attacks on my people?" Darius looked around the chamber, seeing his support crumbling with each passing moment. His hand moved toward his sword, but Lord Commander Greystone was faster, drawing his own blade and pointing it at the king's throat. "I wouldn't," Greystone said quietly, "not unless you want to add attempted regicide to your list of crimes." "This is a coup!" Darius snarled, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "You cannot simply—" "We can," interrupted Duke Aldwin Stormheart, stepping forward with several other senior nobles. "By the ancient laws of our people, a ruler who betrays his sacred trust can be removed by unanimous consent of the noble council. And I believe we have more than enough evidence to justify such action." High Priest Matthias, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, now stepped forward with an expression of profound sorrow. "The moon goddess sees all, knows all, and judges all. If these accusations are true, then this man has violated every sacred law of our people. He is no longer fit to rule." Seraphina felt the power flowing through her reach its peak, and she knew that this was the moment she had been preparing for since that terrible day when she had overheard Darius's true feelings about their marriage. "By the power vested in me by the moon goddess herself," she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "I, Queen Seraphina Ravencrest, do hereby claim the throne of the Shadow Moon Pack. I call upon all loyal subjects to witness the fall of a tyrant and the rise of justice." The pendant at her throat blazed with silver light, and for a moment everyone in the chamber could see her as she truly was, not just a beautiful woman, but a queen in her own right, chosen by forces far older and more powerful than any earthly authority. The nobles knelt as one, their voices rising in a chant that had not been heard for centuries. "Long live the Queen! Long live Queen Seraphina!" Darius stood alone in the center of the chamber, abandoned by his allies, stripped of his power, and facing the consequences of his betrayals at last. As the royal guard moved to arrest him, he looked at Seraphina with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "You planned this from the beginning," he said, his voice barely audible over the crowd's chanting. Seraphina smiled, and for the first time since their wedding, it was completely genuine. "No," she replied, "you planned this from the beginning. I simply gave you exactly what you deserved." As Darius was led away in chains, Seraphina stood before her people as their undisputed queen, having achieved a revenge more complete and satisfying than she had ever dared to imagine. She had not only destroyed the man who had betrayed her, she had claimed the power to ensure that such betrayals could never happen again. The naive bride was gone forever, replaced by a queen who would rule with wisdom, justice, and the kind of strength that came from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger than before. The moon goddess had indeed blessed the kingdom that night, though not in the way anyone had expected. The end. Important disclaimer: this story is completely fictional and was created exclusively for entertainment purposes. All characters, events, supernatural elements and situations are products of imagination and do not represent real people, living or deceased, nor actual events. Any resemblance to reality is purely coincidental.